This is When You Were Everything, chapter Something Wicked This Way Comes, pages 130 to 136. Something wicked this way comes. It was strange being back inside Valeria's apartment, which I hadn't seen since summer. This time it was decked out with fake spiderwebs and pumpkin confetti, was dusted across the table near the door, a bowl overflowing with candy perched on top. A rap song I didn't know was playing, and a bunch of kids were dancing in the center of the living room. It was full, but not overly crowded, so it was easy for us to walk down the short entryway. Layla started looking around for Sloane, and when she found her, we made our way over. "Hey!" Layla shouted. Sloane turned, and when she saw Layla, she threw her arms open wide, almost spilling her drink. "You came!" she shouted, and she seemed so happy to see her that I felt an instant tightness in my stomach. Layla grabbed my arm and pulled me forward. "Chloe's here too," she said, but Sloane either didn't hear or didn't care. "Hey, Layla's here!" Sloane shouted over the music to a few girls dressed in the same costume she was. They were all in short, tight black habits, knee-high socks and heels, naughty nuns. The word basic bounced around my head, but I didn't say it out loud. "Elle, you totally should have done this group costume with us, but I get why you didn't," she said, nodding sagely. "Seriously." All of it struck a wrong note with me. The costumes, the nickname, Sloane's passive-aggressive, "I get why you didn't." That sounded like she didn't get it all. I also didn't like that I had no idea about this group costume. I bet not dressing up like a nun was probably why Layla was so nervous on our way here. Why didn't she just tell me? "Who are you guys?" I asked. Sloane shook her head and pulled out a pair of sunglasses with round frames. The other chorus girls, Sage and Cadence, Valeria and Melody, all lined up beside her after saying hi to Layla. Sloane slipped the glasses on, put her hand on her hip, and said, "We're Sister Act." I nodded and smiled. I'd seen the movie a few times on cable. I looked at Layla, who seemed a little uncomfortable. "Cool," I said, failing to sound enthusiastic. "Want to go find Jace and Mace?" I asked Layla, mostly because I wanted to move away from these girls to make sure she was okay. "Yeah," she said to me, and then, "I'll be back," to Sloane and everyone else. "Are you okay?" I asked as soon as there was enough distance between us and them. She nodded. I told them I didn't want to... I'm going to start over. She nodded. I told them I didn't want to do dress-up like that because someone's religious practices aren't a costume, she said. I'd be angry if someone threw on a hijab and was like, "I'm going to be Muslim for Halloween." Plus, I wasn't going to dress up like them when I knew I was coming with you. "Oh," I said. "Yeah, that makes sense." I looked away from her for a second, down at my blood-stained gloves as I said what I said next, because it wasn't true. But I didn't want Layla to know. I wouldn't have minded if you wanted to dress up with them, though. "I know, but still." She lifted her mask, and her makeup made her eyes shine in the dark room. I was worried they'd think the Muslim girl was, I don't know, uptight or whatever. "I get it," I told her, and it was true. We'd always been outsiders, and this was her chance to be part of something that was very much on the inside. But there were still things about her that made it easier to stand out than fit in. Even if I wanted to, I wouldn't know how to change those kinds of things about myself. "The offer to leave still stands, by the way," I said. She shook her head, elbowed me, and laughed. "Would you stop with the leaving?" We bumped into Jace a few minutes later. "Cleo Imani Baker and Layla Safira Hassan," he shouted. Layla hated her middle name, and I had no idea how Jace had found out what it was. But he was grinning as he said it, and it was hard for anyone to be mad at Jace when he was grinning. He and Mason were both dressed in all black, and knowing them, they were probably ninjas or something. I didn't ask. I pretended to be annoyed with Jace when he gave me a bear hug. But, truth be told, I was so relieved to see his familiar face in this crowd, I could have cried. Mason looked at Layla like he'd been in a desert for hours, and she was a tall glass of water. "Hey," he said coolly. His brown bangs hung over his eyes like the tail of a kama, and he shook them away with a quick toss of his head. His voice seemed huskier than usual, but I just pressed my lips together and didn't say anything when he reached out and pinched a bit of the fabric on Layla's dress, gently tugging her forward. "You guys want a drink?" Jace asked us. "I think I do," I said. I normally wouldn't have anything, but with the chorus girls in their matching costumes, and with tension coming off Layla in waves, I just wanted a little something to take the edge off. I figured it couldn't hurt if I took it slow. I looked at Layla, who shook her head and moved a little closer to Mason. She tugged on one of the strings hanging from his hoodie. I expected her to say something about me having a drink, but she didn't, which just made me want it more. "Come with me," Jace said, grabbing my hand. Ever the wingman, he pulled me back toward the kitchen to give Mason and Layla some privacy. Jace poured me something using more than one of the tall glass bottles on the counter, and the only ingredient I recognized was Coke. He watched me as I took a sip. "I don't hate it," I told him, nodding my approval as he mixed something for himself, and he grinned the widest version of his lovely, dimpled grin. "You know, about anything happening next Friday?" I asked him, because Jace had always been honest to a fault. "I think Sloan is having another thing. Smaller, I think. You coming?" Jace asked. "I hope you'll be there." He sang the words to the tune of the song that was playing. And because I didn't want my features to betray me, I laughed a little. I shook my head and took a sip of my drink. "Can't," I said without further explanation. I swallowed down more of the mixed drink and said nothing else. The truth, that I hadn't even been invited, would have left more of a bitter taste in my mouth than the booze. We stood together near the kitchen for a while, nodding to the music and looking around the party. Layla and Mason had started kissing. The nuns had all moved into the living room, and they were dancing in the center of everyone. That was when I spotted him. Dom was standing across the room, dressed like a badass warlock, in a hooded black robe, ripped black jeans, and thick-soled combat boots. I wondered if it was a nod to his sleight-of-hand magic. He pushed off his hood, and there was a series of stars shaved into his hair. They reminded me of the ones that topped every page of the Harry Potter novels. He was drinking out of a mug shaped like a mini cauldron or pot that matched his getup too well for him not to have brought it with him. And he looked really, really good. A minute later, he turned and saw me seeing him. He smiled. I said a hasty goodbye to Jace and started in Dom's direction without hesitation, feeling buzzed, brilliant, and brave. "Hey," I said, "can you guess who I am?" I didn't know if Dom knew my costume, but I also didn't know if he knew I was the girl inside it. And for some reason, I kind of hoped he didn't. Hiding behind the mask made me feel fearless and powerful. Dom smirked. "Only if you can guess who I am first." "Easy," I said. I sipped my Coke and who knows what else. I pulled on the edges of his robe, and it sort of flopped open because he hadn't zipped it up. "And not that creative, considering you do magic all the time, Warlock." "Close, but not nearly specific enough," he said, leaning closer to me so I could hear him over the music. This must have been what it looked like when Dom flirted. I liked it. "Can I have a hint?" I asked. He nodded, and in the rush of his breath against my neck gave me instant goosebumps. "Something wicked this way comes," he whispered. And then he leaned his head toward the side of the room, where I saw that Jace had rejoined Mason. It took me a second, mostly because they hadn't committed nearly as much as Dom had. The robe made a huge difference. But then I realized that they too were holding cauldron-shaped cups. I was so surprised that I nearly dropped my unidentifiable drink. Gender-bent weird sisters. No way, I squealed, completely losing my cool. I immediately wanted to grab and shake him for being so brilliant, because I knew Jace and Mason well enough to know that those knuckleheads didn't come up with these costumes. It had to have been all Dom. Overexcited, I blurted out, "I'm Lady Macbeth!" He took a step back and looked me over, a smile spreading slowly as he took in the small details of my costume. I flushed under his gaze. I could see him still connecting the dots when I got jostled into him as a few girls danced by us a minute later. "Hi," I said again, this time very closely to his face. I'd put my hand on his chest to stop from falling, and he had grabbed my elbow. Even after the girls passed, we kept holding on. "Hey," he said. He smelled smoky, like his cup was an actual cauldron, and I wanted to ask him what concoction he was drinking. But before I could take my flirting to the next level, I spotted Sloane and Layla over his shoulder. Sloane was on the phone, and from her body language I could tell that she was angry. Layla was in front of her, and she looked pretty concerned too. My best friend alarm sounded somewhere in my head, and it was too loud to ignore, even with Dom only inches away from me. "I'll be right back," I said to him, and I stumbled away through the suddenly thick crowd of bodies toward Layla. "Leia, what's wrong?" I shouted, so she could hear me, because it seemed like the party was still increasing in volume. Layla turned as soon as she heard my voice, and she immediately looked a little relieved. "Cleo, thank God," she said, pulling me a few feet away. "Look, we have a situation." I frowned, but then I nodded. "Okay." Layla let out a heavy sigh and glanced toward the door. She took out her phone and pulled up a text from Cadence. "Katie went outside to take a call and texted me," she said, and for a second I wondered when she had gotten on nickname terms with Cadence York. The screen glowed bright in the dark, crowded room. "OMG, Sloane's ex is down here. He's wasted, and I think he's coming up."